My phone buzzed at 5:40 in the morning, and the words on the screen took the air right out of my chest. Dad, change of plans. You're not coming to the lake house this weekend. Sandra wants it to just be her side. I sold the boat that same afternoon. I canceled the contractor I'd hired to finish their kitchen. And by the time my son and his wife came home from their little family getaway, the property they thought was theirs had a stranger's name on the deed. My name is Walter Greer. I'm 66 years old, and for 38 years I owned and ran a commercial electrical contracting company outside of Columbus, Ohio. Before I tell you exactly how I took apart my own son's life piece by piece, tell me where you're watching from this morning, and hit subscribe if you've ever had to teach somebody you love a lesson they didn't want to learn. It was a Thursday. The kitchen was cold the way it gets in early spring before the heat fully kicks in, and I was standing at the counter in my socks, waiting on the coffee maker to finish its cycle. The house had been quiet for going on 4 years now, ever since my wife Carol passed. I still made 2 cups some mornings out of habit before I caught myself. That particular morning I'd made one, and I was looking at the empty chair across the table when my phone lit up against the granite. It was from my son, Brian, 36 years old, married 7 years to a woman named Sandra. I figured it was something about the weekend, maybe what time to come up, maybe whether I should bring the truck for the dock lumber. Instead, I read 11 words that stopped my heart cold in my chest. Dad, change of plans. You're not coming to the lake house this weekend. Sandra wants it to just be her side. I read it twice, then a third time, like the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. My chest went tight and my hands went very still, the way they used to go still on a job site right before I had to fire somebody. Let me give you the full picture, son, daughter, because you need to understand exactly what was being taken from me. This wasn't some weekend cabin. 5 years ago, I bought 11 acres on Buckeye Lake and built a 6-bedroom house on it with my own crews, the same men who'd worked under me for 2 decades. I put $410,000 into that property, every dollar earned the hard way, climbing scaffolding and running conduit through buildings in January when the wind off the river could take the skin off your face. I built it as a gathering place. Somewhere Carol and I always talked about having a place where the whole family could come together, where grandchildren we didn't have yet could learn to fish off that dock. When Carol got sick, the lake house became the one thing that still felt like hope. We never got to spend a summer there together. She passed 8 months before it was finished. I put the deed in a family trust with Brian named as the eventual beneficiary, but I retained full ownership and control while I was alive. I let him and Sandra use it whenever they wanted. I paid the property taxes. I paid to keep the dock maintained, the grass cut, the pipes from freezing every winter. This coming weekend was supposed to be the first Memorial Day gathering me, Brian, Sandra, and Sandra's parents, who I'd never properly spent real time with. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks. I'd bought steaks. I'd bought fireworks for the kids of the neighbors down the shoreline. And now my son was telling me, by text message, at 5:40 in the morning, that I wasn't welcome at my own lake house because his wife wanted it to be just her side. I sat there a long moment in the gray morning light, my coffee going cold, that text glowing up at me from the counter. A different man might have put his fist through the cabinet. I didn't. 38 years running electrical crews on commercial sites teaches you something specific about anger. It teaches you that anger is expensive and useless. When a panel fails or a circuit goes hot where it shouldn't, you don't scream at it. You trace the wire, you find the break, then you fix it permanently, so it never happens again. I picked up the phone and called Brian directly. It rang twice and went dead. He'd rejected the call. My own son, the boy I'd taught to bait a hook on that very lake before the house was even built, whose entire college tuition I'd paid out of pocket without him ever taking out a single loan, didn't have the spine to hear his father's voice. I called back. This time somebody answered, but it wasn't Brian. Walter. Sandra's voice came through smooth and a little too pleasant, the tone people use right before they say something cruel and want you to think it's reasonable. She never called me Dad, not once in 7 years. Brian's getting the kayaks loaded, he can't really talk right now. Put him on, Sandra. She gave this little sigh, like I was the one being unreasonable. Honestly, Walter, there's nothing to discuss. He sent the text. Plans changed. I kept my voice level, the same voice I used with subcontractors who thought they could slip cheap wire past my inspectors. That's a $400,000 property I built for this family. You don't get to uninvite the man who built it from his own gathering. There was a pause, and then she said the thing that ended whatever was left of my patience that morning. Look, my parents have never had a real getaway like this in their whole marriage. They deserve it. And honestly, Walter, at your age, with your knees, that long gravel road and all those stairs down to the dock, it's a lot. You'd just be tired and uncomfortable the whole weekend. It's really better this way. For everybody. I stood in my kitchen and let that hang in the silence, and Sandra took my silence for surrender. She always did. She thought she was talking to a tired old widower who'd roll over rather than make a scene, who was too hungry for his son's attention to ever push back. "We'll bring you back something nice," she added, almost cheerful now. "Enjoy your quiet weekend, Walter." And then she hung up before I could answer. I set the phone down on the counter and stood there a long time, listening to the refrigerator hum. The sting of her words sat in my chest like a hot coal. You'd just be tired and uncomfortable. At your age, I thought about all the mornings I'd left this house before 5 a.m. For 38 years, climbing onto job sites in January cold, all so my son would never have to know what it felt like to wonder if there'd be enough. I walked down the hall to my study, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. I needed to see exactly what had been done, in writing, before I decided what came next. I logged into the property management portal for the trust. The lake house was held under Greer Family Holdings, a trust I'd established with my attorney, Daniel Marsh, specifically so I could control every detail of the asset while I was living. I pulled up the guest list for the weekend reservation system I used to track who had access to the property calendar and the smart locks. My name had been removed as the primary host for the weekend. Not moved down, removed entirely. In its place were two names I didn't recognize at first. Sandra's parents, Gary and Linda Pruitt. Below them, a third name, Sandra's brother, Tyler Pruitt, 31 years old, a man who, as far as I knew, had never held a job longer than 8 months in his life and currently lived in his parents' finished basement. They hadn't just disinvited me. They'd gone into the system I built, deleted my access for the weekend, and replaced me with her entire family, people who'd never lifted a hammer on that property, never paid a dime toward it, never once thanked me for the use of it beyond a stiff handshake at Thanksgiving. I sat back in my chair and let the full weight of it settle into my bones. Sandra had clearly spent weeks engineering this. She'd have convinced Brian that I was too old, too sad since Carol's death, too much of a downer to have around for a fun weekend. And Brian, soft as warm wax since the day he married her, had let her do it. He'd stood by while she erased his own father from a house built with his father's blood and sweat. I reached for the legal pad I keep on my desk and clicked my pen. I wasn't going to cancel anything. That would be too easy, too small a consequence, something they could shrug off in a week. I wanted them to load up the truck. I wanted them to drive that long gravel road, unpack the kayaks, pop the first round of beers, and feel like they'd won something. I wanted them fully, comfortably settled in before the floor dropped out from under them. I closed the laptop with a quiet final click. The foundation of this family hadn't just cracked. It had been rotten clean through for longer than I wanted to admit, and it was time to find out exactly how rotten. My phone buzzed 20 minutes later. Brian's name on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before I answered, wanting him to sit a moment in the discomfort of having to actually face me. "Dad? You there?" "I'm here, Brian." My voice came out flat. The same voice I used on a foreman who'd been caught padding hours on a timesheet. He stumbled into an apology, fast and rehearsed sounding. "Listen, Dad, I'm sorry about how that came out. Sandra's been having a really hard time lately. Her therapist thinks she needs this trip to just be with people who really understand her, you know? It's not about you specifically. It's a mental health thing. I'd heard this particular tune before, dressed up in different clothes. I knew for a fact that 2 nights earlier, Sandra had posted pictures from a rooftop bar downtown, laughing with a group of friends, looking about as fragile as a fence post. But I didn't say that. I let him keep talking, let him dig the hole a little deeper. "We're going to pay you back for everything, obviously," he said. "Once things settle down for us financially, just please don't be upset, Dad. Please don't make this into a thing." I closed my eyes and thought about Carol. She used to say that if Brian ever tried to wriggle out of taking responsibility for something, you marched him back and made him face it head on. She raised him with backbone. But the day he married Sandra, he'd traded that backbone for somebody else's spine to lean on, and he hadn't stood up straight since. I took a slow breath and did something I'm not proud of, but something necessary. I lied to my own son, smooth as glass. "It's all right, son," I said, gentle as I could manage. "If Sandra needs this, then she needs it. Family comes first. You two go on up, have a good weekend. Don't worry about me." The relief in his voice was instant and almost sickening. "Really? You're not mad?" "Not at all," I said. "We'll sort out the details whenever you get back. No rush at all." "Thanks, Dad. Seriously, you're the best. This means a lot to Sandra." He told me he loved me, told me he had to go help load the cooler, and hung up. He'd swallowed it whole. He was probably walking back into the garage right now to tell Sandra the old man had folded without a fight, just like she predicted he would. They thought they'd won. They had no idea they'd just handed me exactly the room I needed to work in. I was still sitting at my desk 20 minutes later when my phone buzzed again. Not a text this time, a banking alert. I have a joint checking account with Brian, something Carol insisted on setting up when he first went off to college, meant strictly for genuine emergencies. Over the years, the balance had built up to a healthy cushion and just sat there, untouched. A quiet promise I'd made to Carol to always keep a safety net under our boy. I opened the app. My stomach dropped clean through the floor. 2 withdrawals, made within minutes of each other, each one for exactly $9,800. I know precisely what that number means. Any cash withdrawal of $10,000 or more gets automatically flagged and reported to the federal government. Structuring withdrawals just under that line, on purpose, is its own federal crime. Whoever pulled that money, $19,600 in untraceable cash, had done it deliberately, carefully, specifically, to avoid setting off any alarm. You don't pull cash like that to pay a grocery bill. You pull cash like that because you need money that can't be traced back to a transaction, a name, a paper trail. I sat with that for a long minute, the cold settling into my chest in a different way now. This wasn't about a lake house weekend anymore. Something much bigger and much darker was underneath all of it, and I needed to see it with my own eyes before I decided what to do. I drove out to the lake house instead of staying home and stewing on it. The drive usually takes about 40 minutes, out past the suburbs and into the rolling farmland that surrounds Buckeye Lake. But that morning it felt endless, every mile another rehearsal of the conversation I might have to have. I didn't pull into the long gravel drive. I parked half a mile down the county road, behind a stand of sycamores, and walked the rest of the way on foot, staying close to the tree line. The house sat at the top of a gentle rise, 6 bedrooms of cedar siding and glass, the dock stretching out toward water that was just starting to catch the morning light. Brian's truck was already in the driveway, along with a sedan. I didn't recognize Sandra's parents, I assumed. I came around the back, past the boathouse, and let myself in through the side door off the mudroom using my spare key, the one I'd kept for exactly the kind of maintenance emergency this technically wasn't. The house wasn't empty. I could hear voices drifting down from the great room upstairs, footsteps, laughter that didn't sound anything like a family in the middle of a mental health crisis. I climbed the back stairs, slow and quiet, the way I used to walk a job site after hours checking for code violations, putting my weight on the edges of the treads where the wood doesn't creak. I came up into the hallway outside the great room, where the door stood half open, morning light spilling across the hardwood. I could see them through the gap, Sandra, her parents, Gary and Linda, her brother Tyler, sprawled across the couch with a beer already in his hand at 9 in the morning. And I could hear Sandra's voice, bright and mocking, nothing like the fragile woman Brian had described to me on the phone. She was telling her family how easy it had been, bragging that she barely had to push before I rolled right over. Tyler laughed and said something about how the old man probably cried himself to sleep, and Sandra laughed along with him, sharp and delighted, like my grief over being excluded was the funniest thing she'd heard all month. My jaw tightened, but I stayed put, stayed quiet, and kept listening. Then I heard Brian's voice, lower, more hesitant. "Are we sure about the paperwork, though? I mean, doing this while we're up here, away from everything. It feels like a lot. He's not actually losing it. He's just sad. He misses Mom." I went still as stone in that hallway. Paperwork. Losing it. Sandra's voice snapped back at him, hard and impatient. "Brian, we've been over this. Do you want to wait around until he decides to rewrite the trust and leave the lake house to some charity out of spite?" My cousin's husband is a geriatric physician. He already signed off on the preliminary cognitive evaluation. It documents memory lapses, social withdrawal since your mother died, erratic decision-making. It's all in writing. I stopped breathing. The hallway felt like it tilted under my feet. "What if the judge wants an independent evaluation?" Brian said, his voice cracking with something close to real fear. "What if he fights it?" "You know he doesn't roll over." Sandra laughed, low and cold. "He's not going to get the chance to fight anything. That's the whole point of this weekend, Brian. We're up here, completely unreachable, completely out of the picture, while the attorney files the emergency guardianship petition Monday morning. The judge sees the signed medical evaluation. He sees that your father suddenly, inexplicably skipped the first family gathering at a property he built proof, right there, of erratic behavior, isolation, decline. By the time we're back in Columbus, the order will already be processing. We get temporary control of the trust, the house, his accounts, all of it." I stood in that hallway with my back against the cool plaster wall, and every last trace of softness I had left for my son drained straight out of me. $19,600 in cash, withdrawn under the federal reporting line, hadn't gone to groceries or boat fuel. It had gone to bribe a doctor for a fraudulent diagnosis, and to retain whatever attorney was willing to file false guardianship paperwork on a man who could still run circles around both of them on a balance sheet. They weren't just disrespecting me. They were trying to have me declared legally incompetent so they could take everything I'd spent 4 decades building, while I was still healthy enough to know exactly what was happening to me. I eased myself back down the hallway, careful with every step, slipped out through the mudroom, and walked the half-mile back to my truck without looking back once. My hands were steady on the wheel the whole drive home, steadier than they'd been in years, honestly. There's a particular calm that settles over you once fear turns into absolute clarity. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was working. I drove straight downtown instead of home, into the glass towers along the river, and took the elevator to the 14th floor, where Daniel Marsh kept his office. Daniel had been my attorney for almost 30 years, ever since I incorporated the electrical company. He'd handled every contract, every dispute, every piece of the trust I'd built around Carol's memory and our son's future. He took one look at my face when I walked in and told his assistant to clear the next hour. I told him everything, the text message, the structured cash withdrawals, what I'd overheard through that half-open door. Daniel's expression didn't change much, but I watched his jaw set the way it used to when he was about to bury an opposing counsel in motions. "Walter," he said, "you do understand. What you're describing is conspiracy to commit fraud against an elder, on top of federal structuring violations. This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is criminal." "I know exactly what it is," I said. "I want it ended permanently. Today." We spent the next 4 hours in that office. Daniel pulled up the original trust documents. The lake house, like most everything else of real value in my life, sat inside Greer Family Holdings, a revocable trust meaning as long as I was alive and of sound mind, which I very much was, I retained the absolute authority to dissolve it, redirect it, or sell every asset inside it without anyone's permission, including Brian's. Daniel drafted the paperwork to revoke the trust entirely and transfer the lake house into my sole, personal ownership within the hour. He drew up documents to formally and permanently remove Brian as a signatory on the joint checking account and freeze it, pending a fraud investigation into the structured withdrawals. And then Daniel made one more call to a contact of his at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit and reported the structured cash withdrawals along with what I'd overheard about the falsified medical evaluation. Conspiracy to defraud an elder through fabricated incompetency proceedings is a federal matter, and Daniel made sure it was in the right hands by that afternoon. By 6 o'clock that evening, the lake house belonged to me and only me, free and clear of any trust, any beneficiary, any claim Brian or Sandra had ever had on it. I called a real estate liquidation firm Daniel recommended, the kind that specializes in fast, all-cash, as-is, sales to investors. I told them I wanted it gone within the week, furniture and all, no negotiations, no showings, no waiting around. They had a cash buyer lined up by Friday morning. I also called a moving and disposal crew, the same kind of outfit I used to hire to clear out a job site. I told them exactly what I wanted. Every personal item in that house, Sandra's clothes, Brian's golf clubs, the espresso machine I'd bought them as a housewarming gift, all of it boxed up and donated to the shelter 2 towns over, with the exception of anything irreplaceable or sentimental, which I had them set carefully aside in my garage. I wasn't interested in destroying things out of spite. I just wanted it gone from that house, and gone from their hands, before they ever got back. By Sunday evening, while Brian and Sandra were still up at the lake congratulating themselves over s'mores, the locks on the lake house had been changed. A real estate sign was staked into the front lawn, and a moving crew had already cleared the place down to bare walls. I drove out to the regional airport Sunday night and booked myself a flight to Charleston for the week. I figured I'd earned a few days somewhere warm, away from all of it, while the dust settled exactly the way I needed it to. Monday morning, sitting in the airport lounge with a coffee and a view of the runway, my phone rang. Brian's name on the screen. I let it ring 5 times before I answered, wanting him to sit in it a little longer. Dad? Dad, what is going on? We got back and there's a sign in the yard. The locks don't work. Our stuff is gone, Dad. Everything's gone. Where is it? I could hear Sandra in the background, her voice gone shrill and panicked. Nothing at all like the cool, mocking tone I'd heard through that doorway 2 days earlier. I don't have dementia, son, I said quietly. But I did have quite an education this weekend. The silence on the other end was total. I could hear the wind through whatever parking lot they were standing in, and then nothing at all from either of them. The lake house isn't part of the trust anymore, I told him. I dissolved it Thursday afternoon. The house sold Friday. Everything in it was donated except a few things I had set aside for you, if you ever want them. And the account you and your wife structured cash out of the one you tried to use to fund a fraudulent guardianship petition against me that's frozen, and it's currently the subject of a federal investigation. Daniel's already spoken with the FBI. Dad, please. His voice cracked wide open. We can explain. It wasn't. You don't have anything left to explain, Brian. I heard every word of it, standing in that hallway. I heard Sandra's plan. I heard you ask if it was too risky. I heard you call me sad instead of sick, and then go along with it anyway. I let that sit a moment. You stopped being someone I could trust the second you let her plan to have me declared incompetent, so the two of you could take everything I spent my whole life building. End quote. Sandra grabbed the phone from him. She was crying, or doing a very good impression of it, begging me to understand, telling me it had all just gotten out of hand, that she never meant it to go this far. I let her finish. Then I said, calm as I could manage, your cousin's husband signed his name to a falsified medical document. That's not a misunderstanding. Sandra, that's federal fraud, and it has your name on it right alongside his. I paused. I'd find a good lawyer if I were you, a real one this time. I ended the call there, set the phone face down on the little glass table, and finished my coffee while the sun came up gold over the tarmac. I won't tell you it didn't hurt. It hurt plenty. He's still my son, and some part of me will always be the man who taught him to bait a hook on that lake. But I built every single thing they tried to steal from me with my own 2 hands, in weather that would have broken most men, for the sole purpose of giving my family something solid to stand on. I wasn't about to let 2 people who never lifted a single board on that property convince a judge I was too far gone to know my own name. I think about Carol a lot these days, more than I let on to anybody. She used to tell me that real strength isn't the loud kind. It's the kind that just keeps showing up, keeps doing the next right thing, long after everyone else has stopped expecting you to. I think she'd have stood right there in that hallway beside me, just as quiet, just as still, and she'd have told me afterward that I did exactly right. I don't know yet if Brian and I will ever find our way back to something resembling a relationship. Maybe someday, once whatever federal investigators decide to do with all of this plays out, once enough time passes that the truth of it settles into something he can actually look at without flinching. I'm not holding my breath, but I'll tell you this much, friend, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from this morning, you do not have to disappear quietly just because the people who are supposed to love you decide you're inconvenient. You built your life. Nobody gets to take it from you without a fight, not even your own blood, especially not your own blood. What I've learned, friend, is that real love isn't proven by what we hand over, but by what we protect, including ourselves. You can give your whole life to someone and still owe them nothing when they try to take more than what was offered. Stay generous, stay open-hearted, but never apologize for keeping your own dignity intact. That isn't bitterness. That's just love with its eyes open. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI for entertainment purposes, though we hope its life lesson still reaches your heart in a genuine way.